I think we could definitely agree that certain traumatic events in someone's past can definitely influence who they are today. And we could all relate to having a period in life in which the situation you're in just seems to weigh you down. People in this position, of course, feel lonely and that it's impossible to grow, or like they can't spread their wings, so to speak. But of course, if you're in this position, you have to power on and come to terms with what led you to this point and find some way to make a change. Today, I wanted to talk to you about a show called Air. This show is created by Kyoto Animation and is one of the first 3 shows that the studio created. It is also essentially looked at as a part of some holy trinity of moe, which the other 2 shows are Clannad and Canon. Now, I watched both shows briefly a long time ago, but I only remember Clannad, and honestly, I hate to admit it, but at the time I did like it, but I am well aware of its infamous reputation for being pleb bait. Now, in my watch through of older anime, I definitely did see shows that were essentially just cry porn, meaning it was just melodramatic material made to pull your tears. And when you pull back and think about it all, you start to realize that, of course, you would find, said thing to be sad. Of course, with the way the discourse has gone, some people really hate moe and all of the, melodramatic cry porn element. And, of course, some praise it. Honestly, I'm not too familiar with it all aside from watching YouTube videos. Now, I finished this show, and I must say I did in fact thoroughly enjoy the show. However, of course, I would say the experience wasn't as polished as the creators might have intended. Now, I wouldn't erase the show from my memory. I liked how all the character stories wrapped up, and I would even say that when the show wanted to be emotional, it was fairly effective. But there are just some things that are just odd when it comes to the show. I'll explain later what I mean. So the show is about this traveler named Yukito who makes his living as a puppeteer for street change. When he enters a new town, he struggles to make any money and starves himself to sleep. When he wakes up, he finds that this young schoolgirl named Mizusu stayed by him out of some strange niceness and curiosity. After inviting him over for dinner, her and her mom let him stay for a while. The mom says that she sees him as a young youth on a journey chasing a dream and wants to lend a hand. So he gets to stay around until he gets back on his feet. In the meantime, the mom, whose name I guess is Haruko, thinks that this guy could be a positive influence around her daughter Mizusu, as well as keep an eye on her. Throughout the next day, he meets the other girls whose lives will be affected in this pseudo-pedo harem. I think that the personalities of these girls were somewhat well portrayed. As sus it is to say, I do feel that the writers captured the youth of these girls pretty well. I buy their spirit, and I feel like their dialogue is somewhat accurate to how kids of their age would talk. Of course, someone could point out that they're not totally realistic to how real young teen girls, I guess, would act in every way, but I would argue that it comes close in a lot of regards. Upon subsequent rewatches, I always felt that all the kids felt like kids, and I feel like this does help sell the story, or at least, the immersion of the world that you're trying to read into. At the end of the first episode, we learn that Mizusu keeps having this dream of flying. Later on, the dream develops into something more, and this reminds Yukito of the legend that his mom told him of the flying girl with wings. The next episode, we start slowly learning more about Kano, who is the first girl that the show focuses on for the first story arc. So far, the pacing of the show is pretty nice, and I think I would say that I like it up until at least episode 7. Some may disagree and say that the show is slow, and, it might just be a tad. However, the show thus far in these 2 episodes have really let you in on these characters' lives. This is so that you could understand them and get a full picture as all the events unfold. There's also lots of things that the writers set up that will pay off later. For example, they have already introduced us a little to Minabe and Michiru, who will star in the next story arc, as well as implemented, subtle things to pay attention to with Mizusu's mom. Like the fact that she feels useless to Mizusu, even though she loves her as her own, she feels as if she's not cut out to be a parent, and she has this guilt thing going on. This is something which is expanded upon later when we delve more into Mizusu's situation. We also learn, some things with Mizusu when she doesn't tell Yukito that it's her birthday and, just wants to, play with him or hang out with him or whatever. I get the feeling as if the show is trying to say that her character has been lonely for so long that she just, longs for a friend, just wants to soak up every opportunity of it. At the end of the episode, the magical elements of the show finally start showing itself when Yukito and Mizusu notice something wrong with Kano, and, as he starts to, glow and shit. In the next 2 episodes, we get to learn more about Kano's condition. We gather that for some reason she is seemingly becoming possessed, and when this happens, she has, suicidal tendencies, speaks nonsense and just starts to attack people. We also learn some of the things Kano is going through. After Kano's mother died giving birth, it was up to her sister to bear the weight of the whole situation. It also doesn't help that their dad eventually overworked himself into the grave not soon after Kano's mom died. Kano sees her family step up around her and can't help but feel responsible for the burden weight of the whole situation. She tells Yukito that she wants to apologize to her mom for being born. It seems to me that she feels like a burden. It's worth pointing out that with everything that we've seen from both Mizusu and Kano, we are introduced to what the themes of the show are trying to convey. We sort of gather that they both suffer from troubling elements from their early childhood / developing years, specifically relating to, their relationship with their mothers and, their other guardians. And this is what causes their problems today. They both eternalize their issues, and now they are both lonely and massively depressed, with Kano feeling sad about her existence causing her mom to die and her family to work harder, and Mizusu, who feels neglected and lonely because her aunt doesn't show her enough love, care, and attention, because it's painful for her to get close. We can see how their upbringing got them to where they are now. We haven't got to the Minagi and Michiru arc yet, however they suffer from, the exact same problem, just in their own way, which I will point out when we get there. Now, I know that yes, all the girls basically have curses which also make their struggles much more worse and complicated, but I'm pretty sure what the main themes of the show is trying to portray is how important mothers are to one's upbringing, and how if that is disrupted, it causes problems. And it's also worth saying that we all eventually have to face the things from our past that has damaged us. If something from long ago still bothers you today, dreams you can't wake up from will eventually become sad, as the show says. It is still up to you to make things right for yourself and to stop holding on to what was wrong before. Because as the show seems to hint at, these issues could last generations after all. As the story concludes, Kano makes amends with her mom in the spirit world, I guess, and we see the life of the spirit that possessed Kano. In the end, Kano lets go of the guild, decides not to give into her sadness, and moves on. Now, as for the spirit, with the whole bad luck baby curse storyline thing that was passed on to Kano through the feather that she picked up when she was little, I just don't have much to say. It was just a good excuse for Kano to be possessed and have to deal with some supernatural shit so that she could get the, magical connect to meet her mom. It also seems to me that the story is trying to draw a parallel picture here, meaning that the themes of that little tale flashback that we saw is supposed to carry over into the themes of Kano's story. In the story, it's the mother who bears the weight of the whole ordeal, and in the end, she sacrificed herself to save her baby. They struggled through shitty environments which oppressed them, and probably left the baby scarred if she lived. When I think about the very end of the show, where it elaborates more on its concepts, it puts everything into perspective. It just gives me the impression that the show is saying that repeating patterns like this, of course, lead to repeating cycles of poor life happening again and again. I have to reiterate how well-paced it is for the most part. The show pulls away from the main plot so it could set up characters of the next two arcs. We've been hearing about how Mizusu's dreams have been getting more and more vivid, with her going back in time, and we periodically have been checking in on Minagi and Michiru. It seems like Minagi and her mom are somewhat distant, and Michiru's reaction to the whole situation tells that something is lying beneath the surface. In the next episode, the show lets us know more about the Minagi and Michiru situation, while also revealing more about Mizusu as well. Throughout the episode, Mizusu gives more details about her dreams, and as we find out later on, they are connected to the events of the Winged Girl storyline. While her dreams are connected to those events, I feel like the show wants you to see a parallel between them and her life. Again, with the theme of mothers and how problems continue into a cycle that make it hard to grow. As we find out in the episode, Mizusu's mom isn't her real mom, and she's actually just her aunt. Mizusu feels like a burden because her mom died when she was little. None of the adults in her life wanted anything to do with her, calling her strange and dumping her off with Haruko, her aunt. And she found out that Haruko herself didn't originally want her. As we know this because Haruko didn't think she was cut out to be a good mother, and doesn't think she has anything to offer Mizusu. But, of course, Mizusu doesn't know that's how Haruko really feels, and that she has, guilt, and that she actually loves Mizusu. So since she doesn't want to seem like a burden to Haruko too much, she has a reason to distance herself from her. As she grew more and more, she found ways to not be around her as much. Like she said, they essentially live separate lives under one roof. We also learn that Mizusu is unable to make friends because of some mental ailment, where she starts crying and gets sick every time she makes a friend. And of course we find out later that she is a descendant of a winged girl that lived long ago, and this is a curse from being connected to this ancient winged being. Winged person. They explain that because the winged girl's spirit is too much for a human body, Mizusu can't handle it, so she'll essentially die if she loves or gets too close to anyone, so she has to be lonely and miserable. Now, of course, as I mentioned earlier with the whole cry porn element of these Malay shows, when I first heard that, that's of course was one of the first red flags of the show for me. Like, what kind of show is this? Like, that is just some cheesy bullshit to me. Now, with the Minagi Michiru situation, I don't have a ton to say about it other than to point out the reoccurring theme of the show, which again is the importance of mothers and recognizing what in your upbringing still affects you today, and healing from it, and moving on. Over the past few episodes, we found out that there's something up with Minagi's mom. We then learned that Minagi's mom developed a psychological disorder when Minagi's little sister died, from a miscarriage. She, for a while, believed that Minagi was Michiru, which is the dead sister that died. But after a dream, she now believes that both never existed. After this, Minagi runs away. There was also something mentioning that this baby sister is supposed to fill a void in Minagi's mother's heart. Let's just analyze that for a second. Just like with Kano, Minagi is still dealing with troubling elements from her upbringing. And of course, hate to spoil it, but Michiru is just some kind of, spirit that manifested because Minagi needed her. How could the first daughter, Minagi's mom, had not been enough? And if she felt that way before, then who knows, probably would not have changed her or made anything any better. I think it's safe to assume that Minagi probably hasn't had proper, parental love in her life, or maybe even from anyone. Like we've seen in older episodes, Minagi seems miserable all the time. Like she says, she is a fragment in her mother's dream. And just to point out one last time, this is similar to Mizusu and Kanu's situations, where because of what happened when they were younger, and where they are now, they are having a hard time getting on with life. Now, I've got to be honest, the fake Michiru spirit thing really confused me. I did watch the scene a couple of times, but that didn't really seem to help me. From what I understood, Michiru was a spirit that lived amongst the girl in the sky, the same one that Mizusu is connected to. She could possibly be the spirit of Minagi's dead sister, but that's not confirmed. She felt sad. The spirit says that she felt sad and wanted to help Minagi. And she also thought that this good deed would also help ease the girl in the sky too. At first I thought that maybe this spirit character was just some hyper-realized imaginary friend, but it appears that she could be interpreted as some kind of angel of some sort maybe. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something and I'm far off, but the whole explanation was just kind of vague. Anywho, after Minagi's amnesia-ridden mother gets all better all of a sudden, now Michiru has to leave and return to the sky because now her job is over. I also just wanted to mention the conclusion to Minagi's mom was also pretty weak. It seemed like shortly after Minagi left home, the mom suddenly started to become more aware, and then once Minagi returned, absolutely everything was fine and she was fixed. It's weird because I can't really think of an alternative way that they could have done, but it was just really silly. Michiru is heartbroken about leaving Minagi, but can't stay because, as she says, dreams that you don't wake up from eventually become sad. Minagi was a fragment in her mother's dream. Now that her issues have resolved themselves, she can now move on with her life. She no longer needs Michiru as support because now Minagi is no longer tied to a dead dream. She can now spread her wings and fly, as the show would put it. And I think that it's this that really puts the show's main theme into perspective. Like I talked about earlier, all the main schoolgirls were trapped within some bad dream, and now they are waking up to all the problematic elements in their past and present which, affect them now. And as the show explains, as those bad dreams continue, the sadder the situation becomes. The show really drags out the melodrama here, with Michiru having to part ways. And you know what, I'll give the show credit, the final farewell was pretty sad and satisfying. Michiru reminds her to keep smiling no matter what comes her way. In the end, the Michiru spirit helped grow and strengthen her mindset for the future. Pretty melodramatic overall, but not bad.